Hey everyone, Retro Tech Dad here, and this time we've got a little bit of a different video. It's no surprise that I've covered quite a few handhelds here on the channel, and occasionally there are devices that just get past me. Surprisingly, the Powkiddy RGB20S is one of those devices. Now, it's not a handheld that I haven't talked about before in some capacity, whether it was here or over on the Retro Handhelds podcast, so it's definitely a handheld I am familiar with, especially in terms of its capabilities. I'd like to thank Temu for sponsoring this video and sending me this RGB20S so that I can actually take a look at it myself and see if this is still something worth considering even in 2023. You can download the Temu app through my link in the description box to get the $100 coupon bundle for free, or search my code DKB4472 in the Temu search bar to claim on the Temu website. The RGB20S is being sold for just a little over $50 right now, which means it has come down in price since it first launched back in 2022, making this potentially an even better value than it's ever been. If you haven't heard of the Powkiddy RGB20S, its claim to fame mostly surrounds its rise on TikTok, becoming famous there and going viral on the platform. Apparently, Powkiddy has sold more than 200,000 units, and it actually might be one of the most successful of these retro handheld devices. So given that this is a TikTok famous device, it's obvious that this reached some kind of mass appeal, most likely because of its cute design with the stickers and colors that made it stand out from other devices in this category. I think unfortunately that means many people were probably left very disappointed by this product out of the box, as it's not exactly the most user-friendly experience, and I found that a lot of things were not configured properly. That's not to say the RGB20S is a bad product, it's just one that does require a little bit of tinkering to get it to the point that makes it a bit better. Personally, one of the first things I usually do with these devices is trash the included micro SD cards, as they tend to be prone to failure and are just really unreliable. The other issue with devices like the RGB20S that come preloaded with ROMs is that they are usually just a random assortment of games, especially as we get into the platforms that require larger file sizes like the PlayStation 1. So I usually like to put together a nicely curated list of games when configuring a device like this. Now, while prepping a new SD card, I decided to take the opportunity and load up Unofficial OS, which I feel gives this RGB20S a better out-of-the-box experience. Unofficial OS has a specific build for the RGB20S, and it's a simple process of flashing your micro SD card and then letting the magic happen after inserting it into your RGB20S. For those of us that are more familiar with this hobby, the RGB20S wasn't always available at this cheap of a price point. This was a device that used to go for almost double the price, and so now in 2023, this is an interesting handheld to look at, since some other devices at this price point are the very popular Anbernic RG35XX and the Miyoo Mini Plus, which are similar sized devices, but neither the 35XX or the Miyoo Mini Plus have the same amount of power available as the RGB20S, which is actually equipped with what used to be the incredibly popular Rockchip RK3326 that has been seen in tons of emulation handhelds. With that RK3326, the doors will open up a little bit to Dreamcast emulation, and performance will be better for Nintendo 64, PlayStation 1, and Sega Saturn. Basically, if you had a similar budget of around $50 to $60, suddenly the RGB20S enters the conversation because of its lower price point now. These devices are also decent comparisons because they share similar sizes and form factors, but it is pleasantly surprising to see how compact the RGB20S is overall. You do get those dual analog sticks on the RGB20S, and so games like Ape Escape on PlayStation 1 become a possibility. But not only that, it is nice having an analog stick for Nintendo 64 and Dreamcast emulation. And while Nintendo 64, Saturn, and Dreamcast are not fully playable on here, a good portion of the library can be enjoyed. In many ways, the RGB20S is a great option for someone looking to get into the retro handheld scene for the first time with a very low cost of entry. It's surprisingly well made, with a 3.5-inch 640x480 IPS OCA laminated display that is really sharp and bright, which makes games look really crispy. The D-pad and buttons are responsive and work well. I really do like the feel of the face buttons, they have a nice amount of travel and press down smoothly. My only complaint would be that the D-pad and face buttons are placed very low on the device, so you do have to hold it in a very specific way. But surprisingly, this isn't as uncomfortable as it might look because of these shoulder buttons on the back, and so you get this nice grip on it using those buttons there. Many times I rocked the left analog stick and used the face buttons and really enjoyed gaming this way for Dreamcast and Nintendo 64. And speaking of those shoulder buttons, I found them to be more enjoyable to use than something like the Miyoo Mini Plus's shoulder buttons, which aren't really great at all and definitely benefit from something like the better shoulder buttons. With the RGB20S, you get USB Type-C support, dual slots for micro SD cards, and of course lots of fun colors and stickers that make this device stand out from all of the other options on the market. In fact, I think the RGB20S with its cute design is a great handheld to give to your kids or as a gift to introduce someone to classic games for the first time. I brought the RGB20S along with me to a family visit to IHOP, and the RGB20S stalled the show and made its way around the table with everyone taking turns enjoying some Crash Bandicoot Warp. My daughter in particular was drawn to the design of the RGB20S, and so it's quite understandable why it became so popular. This is a handheld that invites you to play. Also, for whatever reason, this device is now being cloned quite a bit, and we have seen the D007, or the dupe, emerge as an RGB20S alternative, as well as this R35S that I ordered for myself recently. Let me know down in the comments if this is something that you want to see me give the full Retro Tech Dad treatment to. Regardless, the RGB20S still seems to be the better option among these clones, and after all of this time still seems to be a solid option now that has come down further in price. But Powkiddy didn't want to be left out of the party, and they have introduced a new purple color which looks really great. My friend Zoo over at Retro Handhelds actually recently covered this new purple variant, and I definitely recommend checking his video out if you haven't seen it yet. So in this fast-paced world of retro handhelds where new devices seemingly release every other week, it's fun to revisit some of our older options. In the case of the Powkiddy RGB20S, older isn't necessarily a bad thing, and while it may lack in power compared to some of the newer options, it's still very much worth considering even in 2023. I'm really curious to hear what everyone thinks about the RGB20S down in the comments section. I know many of my viewers probably already own and use this handheld, and so I'd love to hear your experiences, both good and bad. My specific RGB20S will most likely be gifted to my daughter, who has really been enjoying the device. I hope everyone enjoyed this quick video revisiting a legend in the retro handheld scene. As always, I am the Retro Tech Dad, and thank you so much for watching.